Hello, this is Joan Fernley, your French and Latin diction coach for choirs, and in this video I will read Vieille, prière, bouddhique by Lily Boulanger. It's a powerful work with a timeless message of peace, a daily prayer for the whole universe. It was composed during the First World War by a musical prodigy with an intimate understanding of suffering from years of chronic illness that frequently interrupted her work and ultimately cut her life short at age 24. The combination of her youth, her illness, and her quiet public demeanor fed into the trope of the classic femme fragile with a divine destiny. It's a saintly, devotional image that has persisted for years. But in recent decades, scholarship on Lily Boulanger and her work paints a much more realistic portrait of a determined, almost defiant spirit with a sharp mind living in a complex world. Her life and work could fill hours of video content, and much of it is accessible. What wasn't so easy to find was information specifically related to the Vieille, prière, bouddhique. And as it turns out, it's quite fascinating. I've provided sources in the description box below, which I will update as needed with additional information or corrections that might come up after I post this video. The focus of this video will be almost exclusively dedicated to the Vieille, prière, bouddhique, which for simplicity I will often refer to as the prayer throughout this video, because saying Vieille, prière, bouddhique each time is a bit of a mouthful. In part 1, I will share a very brief primer on Lily Boulanger for a bit of context. In part 2, we dive into the prayer itself, its origins, its translator, and its likely original meaning. In part 3, we'll shift gears into the pronunciation tutorial, beginning with the reading. And finally, because the text is quite short, in part 4, I will share some tips and do a line-by-line coaching. And of course, if you like what I do, please like, share, subscribe, and comment below. Lily Boulanger was born in Paris on August 21st, 1893, into a Parisian musical family, counting 3 generations of musicians with credentials. Lily's sister, Nadia, 6 years her senior, was also a composer and conductor, and she's remembered as a great teacher with an international reputation. Their father was the respected composer and teacher Ernest Boulanger, who married his young student Raisa Ivanova Mistchetskaya, a Russian-born singer from St. Petersburg with a title of princess, but whose origins remain a mystery. Lily and Nadia's paternal grandparents were also notable musicians. Their grandmother, born Marie-Julienne Haligner, was a star at the Opéra Comique, and their grandfather, Frédéric Boulanger, was a talented cellist awarded a first prize for cello at the Conservatory in 1797. The Boulanger line was no stranger to accolades. Father and daughters were all winners of the coveted Prix de Rome for composition. Ernest won first prize in 1835. Nadia placed second in 1908, just 5 years after women were admitted, provided they were not married. And in 1913, Lily broke the glass ceiling, the first woman to win first prize when she was just 19 years old. This family was clearly talented, but Lily soon stood out as a prodigy. The parents immersed both daughters in Parisian musical and intellectual life, and many prominent composers were regular guests at gatherings and musical soirees in their home, most notably Gabriel Fauré, who was Lily's first piano teacher. When I first heard Lily Boulanger's Vieille, prière, bouddhique, it was obvious to me that this was a pacifist anti-war work. The timing made sense, and scholars have documented her sentiments about war in her own diaries. I was also researching Lily Boulanger's wartime work, which consisted of providing moral and material aid to deployed or struggling musicians and fellow composers. My assumption that this was a wartime work is understandable, but it may have been a bit too hasty. As any historian will point out, the future doesn't explain the past. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that by the time she finished composing the piece, it was very much a response to the war. But there is very likely more to the story, and timing is everything. Exact dates are impossible to pin down. However, her sister Nadia recounted in a 1973 interview that Lily would have received the prayer sometime in the summer of 1914, which may very well have been before France entered into the war in early August. Even with tensions running high in the summer of 1914, war was not a foregone conclusion, especially not 4 years of brutal modern warfare. So, no matter when Lily actually started composing, the interest in this prayer likely predates the war. And if it's not a response to war, what is it about? While I can't say for certain, ultimately I think the Vieille prière bouddhique may be a poetic manifesto by two brilliant, determined women about the daily efforts needed for peace and justice, a message that is as relevant today as ever. Like many of her contemporaries, Lily Boulanger was interested in Eastern influences. This wasn't anything new. Orientalism in Western European art goes back centuries. But by the late 19th century, Orientalism mixed with imperialism and colonialism was on a whole other level, and it was on display at world exhibitions. From my 21st century perspective, I am compelled to pause and acknowledge the human cost of this legacy. Like today, artists from a century ago were shaped by and responded to the reality of an increasingly globalized world. And again, like today, their responses ranged from the thoughtful and informed to the superficial and bigoted. Lily Boulanger was no stranger to this reality. Many artists and intellectuals were frequent guests at the Boulanger home, and one of these guests, Louise Gonnet, was Lily's portal into all things Eastern, and she was no doubt well informed as anyone could be. Among her friends, she counted Rabindranath Tagore, an Indian polymath and winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913, and she also counted among her friends Suzanne Carpelès, who translated the prayer originally written in the Pali language, just as she was embarking on an impressive international career as a respected expert in Eastern cultures and languages, holding leadership positions in cultural institutions, and she was credited for playing an important role in the revitalization of Buddhism in Cambodia. And while she couldn't escape France's international ambitions, it seems she was a thorn in the side of the French colonial elites, rejecting assimilation and the direct imposition of French culture, and preferring an approach of association, preservation, and exchange. And that's just the tip of the iceberg on yet another extraordinary woman I knew nothing about. Her influence on Lily Boulanger's work would no doubt be thoughtful and informed, avoiding exotic tropes and appropriations. Up on the screen is Suzanne Carpelès' translation, which, as it turns out, is not a translation, it's an adaptation. As I flip to an English translation of the original, you can see right away that the original is much longer. And this is because she removed references to geography, among other specific references. No doubt this was to make the prayer's message relatable to a much broader audience. Despite these omissions, I think her adaptation is quite faithful, and most importantly for music, it's poetic. Of course, there is plenty of room for scholarly critique on her work, which is best left to the scholars. And thankfully, this doesn't get in the way of this journey of exploration that we're on to figure out what Carpelès had in mind when she adapted the prayer. And the key to that question is found in just a few notable word choices, which may very well point to the ongoing fallout of a decades-old miscarriage of justice that divided the country, the Dreyfus Affair. The first of these word choices is the statement Aryans and non-Aryans. Just a few years after the exoneration in 1906 of Captain Alfred Dreyfus, a French Jewish military officer wrongly convicted of spying, France was still as divided as ever. Anti-Semitism wasn't new, but in the wake of the Dreyfus Affair, it became a bitter political wedge. Émile Zola's open letter J'accuse in 1898, condemning the government and the military of corruption and anti-Semitism, was a tipping point, and there was no turning back. You had to pick a side, especially if you were part of the cultural elite. Now, I have to acknowledge that the word Aryan is jarring to our 21st century ears. It's understandable. We know the horrors that would soon unfold in their lifetimes. Still, you might think the word didn't quite have the same weight back then as it does now. But a century is not that long ago. My own maternal grandparents were alive in the 1910s. So yes, it was a loaded word back then. And it had been since the mid-19th century, with all the anti-Semitic and eugenic implications. Now, the word Aryan was also used in linguistics long before it was ever hijacked. And as a language scholar, Suzanne Carpelès would have known this. But Suzanne Carpelès was Jewish. So I think this was not a language metaphor. This was her statement against bigotry and injustice. The second word is, to me, even more compelling. It's the word déchu in the line Et ceux qui sont déchus. This is translated in the score as those who have fallen, which is clearly a reference to soldiers killed in action, because this English version would have been written close to the 1917 publication date. However, this is not the meaning of déchu, and translating déchu as the fallen is not faithful to Carpelès' text. It's a purely poetic adaptation. The meaning of déchu does involve falling, as in falling from grace. It's a loss of status or reputation, and while the déchus fall off their perch, they're still alive. Someone who is déchu can be a deposed leader, or an athlete stripped of their medals, or a court-martialed military officer stripped of all military rank and honors and sentenced to jail and exile. I can't point to letters or diary entries as clear-cut evidence that Suzanne Carpelès was responding to the Dreyfus affair, but just these two word choices are far too obvious to ignore, and this would not have escaped Lily Boulanger's notice. To me, the Dreyfus affair cannot be overlooked as a compelling factor that inspired and motivated both women. But war may still have been on their mind, possibly both as a critique of France's growing militarism and as a first-wave feminist cause. I was reminded of this when I stumbled on this 1909 poster. The fight against alcohol, slums, and war was inextricably tied to women's suffrage. And women's suffrage was top of mind throughout 1914, having been politically defeated in February of that year. It's impossible to know if the line, "Let all women, let all men," was Carpelès making a feminist statement. The original prayer does mention women and men in that order, but this was far from the literary standard, which was to use homme as the generic mankind, that may or may not include women. After all, in France, it took until 1944 for women to get the vote, and until 1946 for women to be considered equal to men in the Constitution. The First World War was devastating on a scale never seen before, and the sheer magnitude of the losses can, if we're not paying attention, split our understanding of history into reductive before and after chapters, where the past is viewed through the lens of a future that has yet to unfold. When I placed myself firmly in the before position, the ground I was standing on felt eerily familiar. Under the chessboard of military alliances and warmongering leaders, I found the all too familiar fuel that is bigotry, inequality, and injustice, impatiently waiting for a spark. But I also found thinkers, creators, activists, and dreamers that keep the despair at bay. Overall, there were few villains and heroes, just a messy mix of humans, some more thoughtful and kinder than others. Suzanne Carpelès and Lily Boulanger gave us a timeless daily meditation for the whole universe, where every creature that breathes can live, without enemies, without obstacles, transcend pain, attain joy, freely move, each one in the path to which they are destined. Suzanne Carpelès' adaptation stays true to the original in her use of textual repetition. I've highlighted the part that is repeated, and I will read that repeated section just once at the beginning. Que toute chose qui respire, sans ennemi, sans obstacle, surmontant la douleur et atteignant le bonheur, puisse se mouvoir librement, chacune dans la voie qui lui est destinée, que toutes les créatures et partout, tous les esprits et tous ceux qui sont nés, que toutes les femmes, que tous les hommes, les ariens et les non-ariens, tous les dieux et tous les humains, et ceux qui sont déchus, en Orient et en Occident, au nord et au sud, que tous les êtres qui existent. This next line begins with the word chacun. This is part of the repeated text, but earlier it was chacune. This is because French is a gendered language, so depending on the words that come before, if it's a feminine noun, then it will be chacune, and if it's a masculine noun, it will be chacun. Because the text is fairly short, I've opted to do a sort of line-by-line coaching. And we start with que toute chose qui respire. So we have the OU sound and we have the open O sound. Que toute chose qui respire. Next is sans ennemi, sans obstacle. Here we have the nasal en sound, which starts with an ah, and a bit of air escapes through the nose, and you get en. Sans ennemi, sans obstacle. And obstacle has that open O sound, obstacle. Then we have an U sound followed by an OU sound and a few nasal vowels. So it's a lot to take in. We have surmontant la douleur. So we have U and OU. It's a bit difficult. Surmontant la douleur. And then the tricky word in this line is atteignant. Now in speech, that GN is pronounced by sort of closing the back of the throat, but in singing, it's good to bring things forward. So my advice is to lean into a bit of an N sound, but not too much because the N is just the tip of the tongue. So to get your ñ sound, you want to bring most of the front of the tongue right up flat against the hard palate. So it's as if you were to say ñ, 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 except you're saying ñ. Atteignant. It's a bit of an auditory sleight of hand. The goal is to get a good sound that the audience hears correctly as et atteignant le bonheur. And careful here, the B-O-N is not bonheur, it's bonheur. It's just one of those things in the French language. And then this next line starts with another tricky word. It trips up a lot of people. It's puisse. And the danger is to let the OU slide in there. I often hear puisse. So it's just because making that U is difficult. So really work on getting U, and then you have puisse, and then you stick the P in front of it. Puisse. Puisse se mouvoir librement. Then we have chacune dans la voie qui lui est destinée. And of course that final E is voiced in a lot of French singing. It's not voiced in speech, but it is in singing. The trick is to do it very lightly and think of yourself as a ventriloquist and not move your lips. It's just the tongue that has a bit of a release. You start destinée, and it just releases. Destinée. And then in this upcoming line, all the sounds are quite familiar. So do make a point of working on those rolled R's. Que toutes les créatures et partout. Then we have tous les esprits et tous ceux qui sont nés. The tricky part in this line is the ou and e, tout and ce. It's two forward vowels, but ce takes a bit more energy. E sound. Tous ceux, tous les esprits et tous ceux qui sont nés. Then we have que toutes les femmes, que tous les hommes. So it's interesting here we have two words with double M's, and that really opens up the vowel. So we don't say femmes, we say femme, and homme, and that's because of the double M. Then we have les Ariens et les non-Ariens. Now, if you're listening to recordings on YouTube, there's a very good recording with a fantastic tenor, and he doesn't do that second liaison. And so I started doubting myself because my instincts tell me to do it, but I looked it up and everything points to doing it. So I'm not sure why he didn't. It could have been an artistic choice just to carry, just to have a clear diction. It could be my mistake, I'm not sure, but I would opt for that liaison. Les Ariens et les non-Ariens. It's as if I were to say les Européens et les non-Européens. I would do that liaison, so that's why I do it here. Then we have tous les dieux et tous les humains. And the word Dieu is tricky. Sometimes I hear Dieu, so it's definitely an E sound, which start with and then it gets really rounded forward. E. So it's Dieu. Then we have et ceux qui sont déchus. So all these sounds are familiar. Then that's followed with en Orient et en Occident, au nord et au sud. So here the R in nord is voiced, but the D is not. Nord. And finally, que tous les êtres qui existe. Well, there you have it, Vieille prière bouddhique. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment below, and I will see you in the next video.